A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Versus, I don't care what your name is, I love you. Conversational language versus metaphorical, rhythmic language. That is the fundamental difference between prose and poetry. Which one is better for your writing? So basics first. Essentially, prose, what you find in novels and essays, uses the standard grammar and punctuation of regular spoken English. It focuses on conveying thoughts and meaning. Poetry, on the other hand, uses figurative language, such as metaphors, and focuses on the aesthetics, rhythm, and musicality of language. But it's not so cut and dry that you just find prose in a novel and poetry in a poem. The language of prose can be found in a poem, and the language of poetry can be found in a novel. Prose itself does not rely on rhythm, but without a proper understanding of rhythm, prose can become stilted, repetitive, and uninteresting. Using poetic language in novels can lead to richer description and more memorable scenes, but relying too much on poetic language can make your novel seem slow, bloated, or pretentious. Both types of writing have their place in novels and in poetry, and choosing when to use them is a key aspect in developing your unique voice as a writer. But there are some standards in both prose and poetry that need to be met. For the most part, in order to keep your reader comfortable and trusting you as the writer. For example, words in a novel should usually be arranged in sentences and paragraphs, while words in a poem are usually arranged in stanzas and lines. And they don't necessarily need to be in sentences. Unless you pitch your novel as a novel in verse, if you randomly stick stanzas into the chapters, you run the risk of confusing or alienating your reader, since that isn't the form of writing they were expecting when they picked up your novel. On the other hand, in a collection of poetry, if you randomly stick in a poem written in prose, with complete sentences and standard punctuation and paragraph breaks, you are not likely to alienate your reader, since they go into a collection of poetry expecting unusual and unique formatting and playful structure. In fiction, the genre that you write will likely influence how poetic your language is. For example, if you're writing a police procedural, or thriller, you would probably lean more towards straightforward, pragmatic, and punchy lines of prose, rather than slowing the pace of your story with poetic introspection or description. However, in moments of great emotion, you might allow your narration to lean a little more on the poetic side, while the characters sort through their feelings or reminisce. Literary fiction, coming-of-age stories, and epic fantasy might linger more in emotional moments and include more poetic language throughout the novel, saving the more straightforward effect of prose for progressing the plot. Here are some examples. First, prose. From the prologue of The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. Renowned curator Jacques Saunier staggered through the vaulted archway of the museum's grand gallery. He lunged for the nearest painting he could see, Caravaggio. Grabbing the gilded frame, the 76-year-old man heaved the masterpiece toward himself, until it tore from the wall and Saunier collapsed backward in a heap beneath the canvas. As he had anticipated, a thundering iron gate fell nearby, barricading the entrance to the suite. The parquet floor shook. Far off, an alarm began to ring. The curator lay a moment, gasping for breath, taking stock. I am still alive. He crawled out from under the canvas and scanned the cavernous space for some place to hide. A voice spoke, chillingly close. Do not move. On his hands and knees, the curator froze, turning his head slowly. We can identify those paragraphs as prose because of the standard language used, as well as the general setup of paragraph and sentences with punctuation. But you can also help identify prose by identifying the meat of the writing. For example, that segment includes dialogue, necessary backstory of the characters, and only small bits of description that we need to be grounded in the story, and help us understand who the characters are in this scene. Compare that to a segment of poetry from the collection Some Things I Still Can't Tell You by Misha Collins. I, assassin. Now that summer reigns for days, itching, blood-sucking bites from black fleas have welted my skin. Hardware store, gas canisters, 6 hours. Plumes of airborne living room death. The woman with the terrier said, they're in the grass in June, you've got to kill them where they live. So, the lawn too, a toxic wash, oily spray, foam. And then, at my feet, shiny ladybugs running from their beds, stumble, wings half unfurled, horribly onto the flagstones. What have I done? This writing is identifiable as prose because it is not set up in complete sentences, even though it uses standard punctuation. It also doesn't ground the reader with backstory, or describe who the characters are to each other, nor does it describe anything in the setting that is unrelated to the emotional moment of the scene. A second example from this poetry collection includes more prose-like sentences, but also includes more poetic tenets in the form of description, character, and setting. Sun and shadow. Last night, St. Patrick's Day out on a rainy street, I got a call from you. We complimented each other for having told the truth, for having that to count on all these years. Then you explained how you discovered that San Francisco streets always have a sunny side and a shady side. That back in LA the buildings were so spread that both sides are sunny, And in New York, the buildings are so tall that it's shade, 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 except at high noon. You said you hoped you would get a chance to show me the one side sunny, other side shady thing. You hoped I would come back with you and see the light. And I told you you melted me. This poem starts almost like a log entry or diary page, not a complete sentence. It also does not ground the reader with backstory, describe who the characters are to each other, or what truths they're talking about, since those things aren't as important as the emotional experience captured in the poem. Finally, let's look at a style of writing that could be described as both poetic and prose-like. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. Let me begin again. Dear Ma, I'm writing to reach you, even if each word I put down is one word further from where you are. I'm writing to go back to the time at the rest stop in Virginia when you stared horror-struck at the taxidermy buck hung over the soda machine by the restrooms, its antlers shadowing your face. In the car, you kept shaking your head. I don't understand why they would do that. Can't they see it's a corpse? A corpse should go away, not get stuck forever like that. I think now of that buck, how you stared into its black glass eyes and saw your reflection, your whole body warped in that lifeless mirror. How it was not the grotesque mounting of a decapitated animal that shook you, but that the taxidermy embodied a death that won't finish, a death that keeps dying as we all walk past it to relieve ourselves. I'm writing because they told me to never start a sentence with because. But I wasn't trying to make a sentence, I was trying to break free. Because freedom, I am told, is nothing but the distance between the hunter and its prey. This novel is greatly poetic throughout, in part because the author was a poet before he was a novelist, but also because the emotional subject of a son's relationship with his mother lends itself towards poetic language, more so than a thriller or police procedural might. As a writer, it's good to read both poetry and prose because it helps broaden your ideas of what you can do with language. And no matter what you're writing, you might try sprinkling in some more poetic language into the scenes of your novel that are more emotional or retrospective. A few lines of poetic language amid a story of pragmatic prose can be really startling and emotional and capture your reader's interest. And I would suggest you all give it a try.